with the Jaw Potato Sisters.
This episode is all about our interview with Ms.Melissa, who works at Sacramento Zoo and is their senior animal care manager.
We hope you enjoyed our episode.
Okay, so our first question is for our listeners. Can you please give us an overview of your job title, how long you've been doing this field of work, and what got you into it?
So my name is Melissa McCartney, and I'm the Senior Manager of Animal Care and of Veterinary Health Services at the Sacramento Zoo. And I've been at the Sacramento Zoo for 16 years now, but I've worked in zoos for 23 years. I didn't go to college thinking that I would work at a zoo. I actually wanted to be a journalist, and I worked at a newspaper. But because I was at an office a lot of the time, I had free time and I wanted to volunteer somewhere. I knew I wanted to do something with animals that would let me give back. And so I started volunteering at a zoo, at the Oakland Zoo, and I was taking care of animals there and I was helping out with the giraffes. And I decided I liked that so much that I was going to do whatever I had to do to get a job in a zoo. So I started out as an intern. I became an apprentice, and then I finally got my first paid position, and I was a zookeeper at the Houston Zoo. And when I was there, I took care of a lot of African animals. So things like giraffes and rhinos, elephants, zebras, all those types of things. And that's what I really, really enjoyed. So slowly over time, I was able to move up to being a supervisor, and then I became a manager. And then now that I have my job at the Sacramento Zoo, part of it is taking care of the animals, but a big part of it's actually taking care of the staff. So I manage all the people who are zookeepers and then the vet staff and the vet techs. And a lot of my day is things like helping go over medical cases and decide what's the right thing to do for that animal. I help the zoo decide on new animals we're going to get. If we have to move an animal to another zoo, I do like the transfer work and I help the new zoo understand what our animal likes, what they eat, how they're trained, things like that. I also do some things for AZA. That's the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So that's like a big organization, and they go to different zoos and like they'll inspect you and they'll basically say, you know, you're either a good zoo or there's things you should work on to do better for your animals. So I do a few things with them. I write what's called animal care manuals. So it's almost like a how-to guide, how to take care of a specific type of animal. So I do that for giraffes and okapi. And I do some other things helping like set up conferences that people can go to and learn more about these animals and how to be a good zookeeper.
That's so cool.
It's a lot of stuff. It's a busy
I
job.
know she wants to be a vet when she grows up, and I want to be like a
vet.
yeah, and I want to be a conservation biologist. So it's
Oh, those are both really good jobs.
thank you.
Thank you.
So,
What is the thought that goes into running a zoo? What are the logistics that go behind vet care?
So there's a lot that goes into running a zoo. So the first thing is obviously we want to make sure all of our animals are really well taken care of. So at the Sacramento Zoo, we say our number one core value is we lead with animal welfare. So
That's-
any choice we're going to make is going to be about the animals and what's best for them. But obviously a zoo, the whole idea is we want people to come visit us.
Yeah.
And when they come visit us, we want them to learn a bunch of things, but we also want them to have a nice time.
yeah.
So it's not only making sure that we have really happy animals that are healthy and well taken care of, but we also want to make sure that the people who come to the zoo have a good time. And then our other big mission is education. We want the people who come to the zoo to have learned something so that when they leave, they know more about the animals they saw, but they also understand how they can make choices that are good for the environment and good for animals.
Yeah. So, and then what is a general overview of what conservation is like in the Sacramento Zoo? So, like, for example, during our research, we found you have like the SAFE program and your copy conservation program. So, could you go deeper into like the details of what these programs are and all?
Sure. So a zoo like ours, Sacramento Zoo, we're what's called a nonprofit. So all of the money that we make from, let's say someone buys a ticket to the zoo or they go to the gift shop and they buy a stuffed polar bear or they eat at our cafe, all of that money just goes to taking care of the animals.
Mhm.
And then any money we have left over from doing the things we need to do to run the zoo, we donate to conservation work. So most of the big conservation projects working with animals in the wild are funded by zoos and by universities. So any of the animals we have at our zoo, we try to support a conservation project in the wild that supports that species. So we have red pandas at our zoo. We work with the Red Panda Network on programs in the wild to protect forested spaces where red pandas live. Or we have giraffes. So we work with the Maasai Giraffe Conservation Project. They do a lot of work. They stop poachers. They protect land that giraffes like to feed on. We work with the Snow Leopard Trust since we have snow leopards. They do similar work. So a lot of conservation is trying to help the people who live in the area of these animals find ways to preserve their land and keep those animals safe. And the Okapi Conservation Project, I'm glad you mentioned that one. That's a really big one. That one, because they're in the Congo, they do really cool programs for the people who live there. So the Okapi Conservation Group will do things like build hospitals and schools. They'll give people jobs. They'll teach them things like crop rotation, and then they don't have to go poach the Okapi. And they've done a big program. Women who live in the Congo tend to not have jobs. They stay home and take care of their families. But they've given the women things like sewing machines. And so they can create a lot of things they can sell, and they help bring in money for their family. So since they're contributing, you don't have to poach to make money. So a lot of conservation work that is done, zoos are supporting, we're funding all the really great people, conservation biologists like what you want to do. We help pay for them to be out in the wild doing the great work that they do.
Okay, so and then how do you make sure that each individual animal and plant gets the best and personalized treatment?
So what we do, we call that welfare. So welfare and wellness are both, they sound a lot alike, but they're kind of different. So each one of our animals has, if you think like if you went to the doctor, you're going to have your medical records. They would look up your name, they'd pull you up, see everything about you. So every one of our animals has a record like that. And
Okay.
it has everything. So every year they're going to have a routine checkup from the vets.
Mhm.
If they ever get sick or something seems wrong, we're going to put a bunch of notes in their file. The vets are going to come look at them. Keepers are going to put notes in. They're going to talk about things like, yesterday I tried to feed potatoes and they didn't like it. So today we tried green beans. And they're going to figure out exactly what those animals like, exactly what they enjoy doing. And then we just keep really detailed notes. That way the next person who comes along to take care of them knows exactly what that animal likes. We also do things we call welfare assessments. So it's basically picture like a big checklist, and you go through and you just look at, does this animal look healthy? Does this animal eat all of its food? Do his teeth look good? Is his fur in good condition? Do we see him being active and playing? And we do that on a regular basis. So if any of those questions are a no, we know there's something wrong and we need to fix it.
How do you handle and transport animals when there are like fires or natural disasters happening near the zoo?
So we practice all the time. About 6 times a year, we'll have drills, and we'll practice things like an animal getting out, or we'll practice if there was a flood or a fire. We'll practice if a guest does something not wise, like trying to climb over a barrier or putting their arms through the bars to touch an animal. And we practice what we would do, and that includes putting every animal into crates or onto trucks to move them out. It includes our response. So a bunch of us are trained for things like trying to put out fires or handling medical emergencies. So we know, CPR and first aid, including for animals if we need to try to rescue them that way. So it's something you just have to practice all the time. Kind of like having an earthquake drill in school, if you practice and you know what to do, then when an actual emergency happens, you react a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you make sure animals and people have a happy and comfortable interaction at the zoo?
So we know a lot about our animals because we spend so much time with them. So we know which animals are shy and maybe don't like being near people as much. So with those animals, we'll do something like we'll set up their homes so that maybe there's a bigger distance between them and guests, like we move a fence line out, or some animals like our new male lion, he gets nervous when too many people are looking at him. So we just put in new plants. And he thinks if he hides behind one of his bushes, nobody can see him, but he can peek out at the people. So there's things like that that we can do to make them feel more secure and safe. And then if there's animals that just love people, we find ways that guests can interact with them more because that animal obviously likes the attention and likes the fun. So we might do something like set up behind the scenes tours where guests can come and feed them since the animal likes it.
So, and then what goes into your enrichment program at the zoo?
So enrichment is really important. We start by taking an animal and we look at their natural history. So that means we look at where do they live in the wild? How would they spend their time in the wild? Would they be with other animals of their kind? And then based on that, we try to pick activities and toys and things that would make them feel like they're doing all the behaviors they would do in the wild. So
Okay.
for an animal that spends a ton of time looking for food, we don't just feed them one bowl of food in the morning and that's it.
Yeah.
We take their food and we spread it out through the whole day. We hide it. We put it in different places. We put it in toys and we make them look for it and work for it the same way they would in the wild. If it's an animal that would spend time swimming, we make sure they have a pool and things like that so they can get the right kind of exercise. So enrichment is about making sure animals have things to do, that their minds are stimulated, not just their bodies. And we make sure that the way they spend their day feels a lot like what an animal in the wild would do.
So, could you give us some specific examples for some of?
So we have giraffes, and giraffes in the wild spend all their time standing around and eating trees. So we send keepers out every single day and they cut a whole truckload of tree branches and then they bring it back to the zoo. They climb up ladders and they hang it up as high as possible. So those giraffes feel like they're standing there and eating leaves off of a tree instead of just, pouring some kibble in a bowl or something like that. So if you were a giraffe at the zoo, you would spend your time eating exactly the way a giraffe in the wild would. And that might not seem like the most fun and exciting thing for a person, but for a giraffe, that's what you want to do with your day. You want to pick up leaves. For other animals, some of the enrichment is things like just making sure they have a big family group or a social group. So we keep squirrel monkeys. Squirrel monkeys love being in a big group. So anytime somebody has a single squirrel monkey that needs a home, we offer to take it. That way it can join our group and it can get all that social interaction and have a family and feel safe and comfortable.
That's awesome.
Well, you said that the giraffes, the workers cut down some trees and bring it to the giraffes so that they can really feel like they're eating the leaves in the wild.
Yep.
What trees do the workers cut down?
So in different zoos, you're going to use different trees depending on what grows in your area. So one of the things zookeepers have to learn is which trees are toxic or poisonous to an animal and which trees are safe. So they spend a lot of time because if you make a mistake, that could be really dangerous. You can make an animal sick if you choose the wrong tree. So here in Sacramento, where we are, a lot of people have elm trees. A lot of people have mulberry trees. There's people with lemon trees and orange trees, and those are all ones that giraffes really like to eat. So we're lucky that people grow those just to look nice in their parks and their neighborhoods, and it happens to be giraffe food.
So, how do you get your animals into the zoo? Do you like get them from like other zoos, or how does it work?
So
And
that's a really good question. Yeah, a long time ago, obviously the animals they had in zoos they took from the wild, but nobody does that anymore. So all of the zoos work together. So there'll be one person and that person will manage a particular species. So like I manage okapi. So if you went to a zoo and you saw an okapi, I know every single okapi that exists in a zoo. I know their names. I know how old they are. I know how they're related to the other okapis. So if a zoo said, I want an okapi, I would look around and I would find the right one for them. Maybe it's somebody who's close by so the okapi doesn't have to travel far. or if they have one and they want to have a pair so that they can have babies, I would pick somebody who wasn't related and seemed like a good match. And then once I've made a recommendation for an animal, it'll transfer from one zoo to the other. And that can look like a lot of different things. We're getting a lion for our zoo this next week. So
Ooh.
somebody from our zoo is going to fly out to the other zoo. They're going to help them load that lion into a really, really, really big crate made of metal, so it's safe. And then they're going to put them on a plane, and it's like a cargo plane. So the zookeepers have to fly in a cargo plane with that animal to bring it to us. For some smaller animals, like we're sending a snow leopard to another zoo, we put him in a crate and he flies on a commercial plane the same way that you could fly your dog or cat. Sometimes we have to use trucks. So an animal like a giraffe, we would load them into a truck with a trailer that almost looks like a trailer you would transport a cow or a horse in. It's just way bigger. And they walk onto their trailer and they drive down the freeway till they get to their new home. So a lot of times you could be passing by cars and trucks that have all kinds of crazy animals in it, and you might not even know.
Okay. And then, so 2 questions. So do the animals born in the zoo stay in captivity? And also, how do you manage genetic diversity between the groups of animals?
So not all animals that are born at a zoo will stay at a zoo. There are some species of animals that we keep in zoos and we breed, and the whole point is we want to repopulate the wild.
Yeah.
And that works better for some animals than others. So in Sacramento, we take care of Western pond turtles and we'll breed those. And that's an animal that can be released back out into the wild. They're critically endangered here in California. We work with things like garter snakes. So sometimes garter snakes are found injured because of like farming and things like that. So we'll take care of them, we'll rehab them, and then we'll re-release them. A bunch of zoos worked together to breed an antelope called a scimitar horned oryx that was almost extinct in the wild. And they took a bunch of them back to the parts of the world they come from. They took them to Chad and they released them. And those animals are in the wild and they're breeding on their own. So that population is coming back. There are other animals that we know probably wouldn't do well going back into the wild after having lived in a zoo. They just don't learn the right skills.
Yeah.
But we keep those ones. First of all, if the population ever did go extinct, at least we would have some to try to help. But also the ones that are in captivity, we think of them as ambassadors. All the things we learn from taking care of them will teach us how to do better saving the ones in the wild. And then your question about genetic diversity, that's a good one. That goes back to what I talked about earlier of somebody who manages each population, because they know every single individual, they know who they're related to, they know their genetics. That one person is in charge of deciding which animals breed in all of the zoos. So nobody at a zoo would take 2 okapis and put them together and have a baby okapi unless they checked with me first. And I told them that's a good match and they're not related. And there's somebody who does that for every single type of animal. So we all work together to make sure we're sharing animals and that we're making good choices.
So the breeding program is heavily controlled then?
Yes, heavily controlled by a population biologist working alongside, we call it an SSP coordinator. SSP means Species Survival Program. So that person is keeping track and making sure that we don't make any mistakes.
Okay.
How long have you been releasing animals into the wild?
So a long time. There's a lot of zoos that have programs going back quite a long ways. In California, there's a couple things like the yellow-legged mountain frog that a lot of zoos have worked together to re-release. Years ago, we used to breed a species of antelope called the bongo, and bongos were taken back to their native areas of Africa and released there. So it's been something that zoos have been working on for a long time. And I think every year we find more ways to get better at it so that more animals can return to the wild. And that's where conservation biologists come in, because we need conservation workers protecting those wild spaces. It doesn't do any good if we create a bunch of animals and go to release them and they don't have a safe place to be.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, what is your daily routine at the zoo?
It's busy. So I get there at 7 a.m. and the first thing I do is I check to make sure my staff are all showing up, and then I check in with my vet staff and I make sure all the animals were okay overnight. Then I go meet with my security team and I make sure the actual physical zoo is safe. Then I'm going to call all the zookeepers and vets together, and we're going to have a meeting where we decide what the day looks like. So we'll decide if any animals need medical exams. We'll decide if there's any projects we need to do to like fix up an exhibit or an enclosure. Then I'm going to do another walk through the zoo. And as I go, all the people who are getting ready to open the zoo for the day, I'll check in with them to find out if they need anything. I'll make sure the cafe is ready to go. The front gates are ready to open. The bathrooms are clean. We've watered all the plants, all of that type of thing. A lot of times I get stuck at my desk, and that's the boring part of my day, but I have to do the things like pay the bills to make sure we have food for the animals. And I might be sending emails to other people to find out about transfers for animals and things like that. Sometimes I have to travel. So I might have to go visit another zoo to help them with something, or I might be going to a conference to teach other people. But it's usually a busy job. I also like to try to help out the zookeepers because it's a very hard job. It's very physical. So if they need extra help doing things like raking yards or hosing dens or moving hay, I usually try to do some of that too because they have a really hard job and I like to try to help them out.
So, quick question. So, me and my sister, we love to watch like the Taronga Zoo series on Disney. Yeah, and we see like they don't waste anything. So if one animal poops, they'll use it as for another animal's enrichment and stuff. So
Yep.
do you at the Sacramento Zoo do that too?
Yep. So we'll do things like we'll take bedding, we'll take feathers, we'll take snake sheds, because animals in the wild, they encounter a ton of other animals. And that could be safe, it can be good, or it could be scary and bad. So for an animal like a lion, if we put giraffe poop in their enclosure, that's really exciting. They get to sniff around and they can pretend they're hunting for something and try to find it. But we wouldn't do the opposite, because obviously if we put lion poop near a giraffe, they'd be scared. But giraffes like a lot of other things. So we might bring them things from another animal's habitat. Like we might take hay from the girl giraffe's stall and put it in the boy giraffe's stall. And that makes him look around and decide, are there female giraffes he should be looking for? And so, yeah, there's a lot of things you can do to share things. You're definitely right. We don't waste anything.
That's great.
How do you make sure that animals can survive in the wild if they're born at the zoo?
So it can take a lot of training. And that's where enrichment also comes in. So if I just went and I put your food in a bowl and I put it right in front of you every day, you wouldn't learn very much. But if you're an animal that should be hunting and I hid your food and I made you, learn how to track it down, and then some zoos, like if you're re-releasing an animal that's a carnivore, they'll actually let them practice with live animals, which can seem kind of sad, but circle of life. If you were going to hunt in the wild, somebody needs to give you the chance to do it. Other animals are easier. If you're a frog, it's not too hard to learn how to live. You can set them up in a nice big tank, give them water, float some bugs in there. And that's pretty much exactly what they would have to do out in the wild. So it just takes a lot of training and work to think about what would this animal need to survive if there was no person to help it. And then you teach them those skills.
So I was wondering, how do you like manage the temperatures for each animals in the exhibits?
That's a good question. So each animal, we look at what would they be used to if they lived in the wild. And then we set up for us what we call temperature guidelines. So if you were an animal that was used to hot weather, if it's hot days, we just let you do whatever you want. But if it was cold, we would probably give you heaters, or we would always give you access to your den and your bedroom that was heated because you're not as acclimated to cold weather. And then the opposite's also true. So like an animal like a red panda, they don't like the heat. And obviously Sacramento is very hot. So in their exhibit, they have boxes that from the public side, if you just looked at them in their enclosure, they just look like they're laying on a platform, but it's actually cooled. It's filled with ice blocks, so it feels cooler to them. They have air conditioning that's blowing into their boxes and into their bedrooms. So there's a lot of things that go on that we can do to help keep them comfortable that maybe you don't necessarily notice. Our lions have things like heated rocks and heated platforms. So if the temperature's too cool, they're laying on something that feels nice and warm to them. And we just don't notice it when we're looking from the front.
Oh, that sounds nice.
Yeah.
Can you go more into your program of releasing animals into the wild? What runs up to that?
So usually a program like that is headed by a university because they're the ones that can employ a bunch of people who can do all the really hard scientific work. They can decide what's the best age to put animals back in the wild to make sure they survive. They can decide what's the right place to do it, because if that animal doesn't live in the wild in that place anymore and we introduce too many too fast, we could do something bad to that ecosystem. We could end up, causing a problem when we thought we were helping. So there's a lot of universities that head up those types of programs, and they work out the really hard details. How many, what age, where should you put them? Did they investigate the whole landscape to make sure it has the right resources that animal needs? And then when they feel like they have a really good idea, they'll come talk to the zoos and they'll say, hey, we think thick-billed parrots is a good one. We work with thick-billed parrots at the Sacramento Zoo, and it's the only parrot that used to be native to the United States. And they don't exist in the US anymore, but they're still in Mexico. So there's a university that's working on a program figuring out where are the places they used to live in the United States, and do those places still have the right resources? Like if you put thick-billed parrots back in the US where they used to live, have we cut down too many of the trees that they would live in and they wouldn't be able to survive? Do they still have access to the right water? And once they've done a bunch of research like that, so they're working on that right now, and they think within 5 years they'll be able to tell us if the landscape in the US could handle us putting those birds back. And if they think it's true that it would be safe, then we'll start with the young chicks that we raise, teaching them how to find their own food. And the idea would be that we could put them back in the wild in the United States where they both used to live.
Okay.
I know you already kind of answered this, but how do your conservation efforts go beyond just what you do in the zoo?
So most conservation, the most important thing, we think of conservation, saving animals when we work in a zoo, but the most important thing is actually working with people. It's easy to say it's bad to poach giraffes, but if I don't live where giraffes live and I don't see what those people go through and what their life is like, I can't really make a difference. And so you have to talk to the people who live in the area and find out, why are those animals not doing well? And it might be something simple. It might be they're farming and there's a lot of people living there, and their farms are just cutting off the space the animals would normally use. So then you can work with the people in the area and say, what if we had better farming techniques that meant you didn't use so much space? Or what if we helped you lay out your farms in a way that animals could pass through it and they wouldn't ruin your crops, but they could still migrate if they need to? So it's more about working with people to find out, what are we doing that's making it hard for these animals? What are we doing that's making them go extinct? And then once they give us an idea about how they live their lives, we try to find a solution and work in a compromise, because it's easy to say, don't hurt animals, don't pollute, don't cut down trees. But those are people's homes and they need to live there and they need to be successful. So we need to hear what they're saying and then work with them to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways you have engineered for animals to go through painless and no stress procedures, such as ultrasounds or anesthesizing them up for a checkup?
So we use what's called positive reinforcement operant conditioning. And that's basically just a long way of saying we work with the animals to teach them to participate. So a lot of training with animals in a zoo is showing them that they can have a choice about what's going to happen and that they can learn something. So we might teach like our chimpanzees that if they sit still and let us give them a shot, they
Okay.
could have all their vaccines and they're going to get a treat for doing it. And they realize, this doesn't hurt. It's not scary. And that stops us from having to do something that is scary, like use a dart gun or catch them up and force them to do it. So a lot of a zookeeper's job, a really big part of it, is training animals. And so we can train giraffes to let us pick up their feet and trim their hooves. We can teach monkeys to sit still and let us take x-rays. We can teach our red pandas to stand up and let us do an ultrasound of their tummies if we're checking for pregnancy. And they're always given a choice if they want to do that with us. And they're always given a reward for helping. And so eventually they just learn this isn't scary. Nothing bad happens. I got treats for doing it. And then it stops us from having to do anything that might be frightening to the animals. It stops us from having to dart, net, hand grab, all of those things. We give them the opportunity to participate.
And so, say with like animals like meerkats would have like a very complex social hierarchy, right? So if like the leader of this group had to go for like a long checkup or something, or something that would happen over a period of days, how would you manage that social hierarchy?
So that's something that we deal with a lot. So if we have to do something like split up our meerkat mob, usually what we'll do is everybody will get split up. So instead of taking one animal away and letting the others
Right, it-
redecide their structure, we'll split everyone up on their own so that nobody can, form an alliance or
Yeah.
turn on anyone. And then a big part, meerkats are a great example. A big part of how meerkats socialize and set up their territories is they use scent marking.
Mhm.
So if we take all of the animals out and separate them, then we'll go into their spaces and we'll disinfect it. So we'll take something that smells really strong and is going to cover up the smell of meerkat. So what we use is Listerine, the mouthwash.
Oh.
It's so strong that when meerkats come back, it doesn't smell like any one particular meerkat. So that meerkat doesn't get to be in charge by being the one who scent marked the most things. They all have to start back on neutral ground. Everybody came back at the same time and their space smells like nothing that they're used to. And
Mhm.
so then they have to start over. So it helps us stop one animal from having an advantage. So
Mhm.
that's one of the things we have to think about a lot because we could move one animal for a medical exam and we could mess up their whole social group.
Yeah.
So it's very complicated. And that comes from our zookeepers really knowing a lot about how those animals live in the wild and then knowing a lot about their individual animals.
How do you stop animals from fighting?
So we don't always. It depends on the type of animal. For us as people, we think of fighting as a really bad thing,
Yeah.
but for some animals, it's really important.
Yeah.
So there's fighting that's a normal social thing. Like, for an example, any antelope that has horns, those males are going to fight. That's what they're supposed to do. So something like that, we would just let it happen. That's good for them. They decide who's in charge. They decide who's the strongest. Chimpanzees are another good example. Chimpanzees fight a lot, and it can seem really scary, but chimpanzees in the wild fight constantly. That's how they figure out who's in charge. That's how they figure out who gets access to food. Lions from the same pride are going to fight when it's mealtime. So, fighting that is the same as what they would do just naturally is something that even though it seems to us as people bad, it's a part of their life. And so we want to let them do that. If there's fighting going on that isn't normal, that's on us to try to look at the situation and figure out, what did we do? Did we put you in too small of a space?
Yeah.
Did we not give you enough food resources and now you want to compete for them? Are you just two animals that really don't like each other? Because animals are just like people. Sometimes you just don't get along with somebody else. So we have to pay attention to that kind of thing because obviously, as people, if you don't get along with someone, you could get up and walk away. The animals in the zoo can't just get up and walk away. So for that type of fighting, we pay attention and then we decide Maybe there's just animals that can't get along and we need to split them up.
What is a good example of an animal that would be unhealthily fighting?
Uh, there's some animals, so alligators, chimpanzees, squirrel monkeys. There are some animals that just fight. That's just part of, for that animal, that's their culture. That's how they socialize. That's how they figure out who's in charge. Um, Meerkats, if you're giving them all the things they need, they don't fight. So for us, if we have a meerkat fight, that's usually a signal for us that there's a problem.
Yeah.
And it's not that they don't ever fight in the wild, but usually when they fight in the wild, it's because there's a problem. Then there are some animals who just fight because that's what they do. You know, they wake up and sometimes it's just timed. So some of it's personality, and that's where zookeepers are so good at what they do. They know their individual animals and they can say, this one's just a troublemaker. Maybe they need a timeout. They're bothering everyone. Or they can tell you that's normal. That's what they're supposed to do. And so we just let it go. But there are definitely some animals that they're pretty violent in the wild, and it can be hard for us to watch, but we need to accept that just because it seems weird to us, it doesn't mean it's not right for them.
What is your quarantine procedure for animals that came from different places to the Sacramento Zoo?
So the first thing we do is we're going to send a list of requests to the vet at the other zoo, and we'll ask them to do what's called a pre-shipment exam. So
Yeah.
they'll take the animal and they'll give it a complete physical exam, and then they'll do any tests that we ask for. And the tests can be different for different animals. So some animals like giraffes or antelopes, they're more likely to carry like parasites or things that they would pass in their feces. So we would ask them to check fecal samples every time that animal goes to the bathroom for 3 weeks, and we'll make sure there's no parasites. And if they find something, we'll ask them to give them a dewormer because we don't want them to bring parasites to our animals. For some animals, they could be likely to carry an illness or a disease. So we might ask the vets to run blood work or do things like that and look for a problem. And then once an animal gets to us, it depends on the individual animal. Some animals don't do good with quarantine.
Yeah.
And the idea of keeping them isolated by themselves would just be stressful and harmful for that animal. So we do what's called a risk-based quarantine. So we look at the risk. Did this animal have any tests that said maybe they were unhealthy? If no, if they're a healthy animal, then maybe we can just introduce them to our animals right away to
Yeah.
make sure that they're comfortable and happy. If there was something on their tests that seemed a little off, then we might do something what we call like a modified quarantine. So a good example is lions. Lions are social and they do not like being alone in the hospital.
Yeah.
So we'll put a new lion on one half of our lion building and we'll give them their own outside yard. And then we'll put our lions on the other side of the building so they can talk to each other, they can smell each other, they can see each other. But if that one lion was sick, it couldn't give cooties to another lion until we've had enough time to make sure they're well. And
Yeah.
then there are some animals that don't mind quarantine at all. So we put them in our vet hospital for 30 days. And during that time, we check their blood, we check their poops, we make sure they're not coughing or sneezing. And then after 30 days, we can usually feel pretty certain they don't have anything that's dangerous. And
Yeah.
then we'll go introduce them.
So is this how you introduce like most new animals to their new families?
Yep.
Okay.
Almost
And
everybody goes through a quarantine and then we do a period of introductions. So we make sure that everyone likes each other and it's safe.
okay. And then how do you handle like seasonal mating? Like for example with antelope, they'll like start fighting, right? So how do you handle those times of the year?
So, with different animals in zoos, we try to just set them up in groups that might eliminate some of that problem. So, like a giraffe bull in the wild would walk around and beat up a bunch of other male giraffes and fight to find females. Most zoos just keep one male giraffe. Then you don't have to worry about him beating up everyone or getting hurt.
Mhm.
But with other animals, we just have to let them. We know what times of the year everybody's going to go into their breeding season, or what time they're going to lay eggs or things like that. So our flamingos are a great example. When they are getting into breeding season, they are going to fight with each other. They're going to do different displays with their wings and march around. So we just make sure they have a big open space, and we make sure they have a mud bank, because that's how they like to build their nests. And if they squabble around and steal each other's nests and break each other's eggs, that's what they would do in the wild. So we just let it go. We just try to monitor it. But some animals, if it's going to be really unsafe, then we control it. And we can do things like separating the male and the female. If we don't want to have a baby at that time, it's not a good idea. We don't have a home for it. We'll just split them up. And then it, keeps us from having those problems.
Okay.
What is the most challenging animal care routine the zoo has had?
Great apes are really hard, just because they like to fight,
Yeah.
but they can be easier to train and enrich because they're so smart. But there can be some animals, like amphibians, can be really hard because they're so sensitive to what's in their water and what their air quality is like and what their humidity is like. So some of the little animals that we don't think of too much when we're talking about zoos. We tend to think of lions and bears and tigers and things, but some of those small animals can be really, really sensitive. And so you spend a lot of time trying to make sure everything is just right.
What is the difference between taking care of a white rhino and a black rhino? Because we know you take care of rhinos.
So white rhinos tend to be a little more gentle, a little more laid back, because white rhinos in the wild kind of just wander around. But black rhinos will live in a family group, and
Oh.
usually the animals that live in family groups fight more. So
Mhm.
black rhinos can be a little bit more aggressive because they're used to fighting with other members of their kind to try to establish who's dominant and who's in charge. So black rhinos can be a little more dangerous to take care of because they're used to fighting. White rhinos are very calm and laid back because they don't do much fighting in the wild.
In my research, I know that white rhinos, they charge at something that's unfamiliar. Um,
So
how do you make sure that they don't charge at some
new
things that are
zookeepers?
unfamiliar, like new?
So, because all the white rhinos that we take care of in zoos were raised in a zoo and around people, they're very familiar with it. So, we don't usually have that problem. Like our white rhino, Jay Gregory, is kind of like having a big dog. He knows people. He knows he's going to get treats. He understands the things that are being asked of him, that someone's going to come and, scrub him down with a scrub brush that he likes or trim his nails for him. Rhinos tend to charge because they have really, really bad vision. Rhinos can hardly see anything. So, in order to keep yourself safe, if you're not sure what's coming, you can just run into it.
Yeah.
But raw rhinos are so used to people and so used to being told what's going on and working together with their staff that they don't really have much to be afraid of.
Do you go on like rescue missions to like rescue like animals that are being illegally owned?
So that's one of the things I'm actually going to leave for a trip when I finish talking to you guys.
Oh wow.
So it's a zoo that is privately owned, and they have not been taking very good care of their animals.
Mhm.
And the government in that state looked into it, and they said they think it's animal abuse. So they want those animals to be moved somewhere else. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll call in experts from zoos who know how to take care of animals like that and how to move them safely, and they'll ask us to come in. And so once a judge says it's okay and that the government has the right to take them and confiscate them, I will show up and I will load them up and I'll drive them to a place that will take better care of them.
Okay.
Do you know anything about the Javan rhino? Because not a lot is known about them.
Javan rhinos, there are almost none left. They're really cool, but they come from a part of the world where their ecosystems being really badly impacted by people. So they're not poached or hunted intentionally a lot of the time. They're kind of just disappearing because their land is getting ruined. It's like orangutans. Somebody's not going to go catch one and eat it, But if you're trying to grow palm oil plantations or you're deforesting the area so you can build more homes, there's just nowhere for the orangutans to live. So that's kind of what's happening to Javan rhinos.
Do you have any kind of rescue program you're working on to help them out?
We don't work with Javan rhinos in particular because we have white rhinos at our zoo. But there are several conservation efforts underway to try to save them because there's so few left that they need to make sure they can preserve the genetic diversity and also try to save some of the land they would live on.
Yeah.
Why did white rhinos evolve to be the only grazing rhino?
So usually if an animal lives in an area and they're facing a lot of competition for food, the ones that find a way to not have to compete tend to thrive. So you think of like a giraffe getting taller and taller and taller over time as they evolve, because then they're the only animals who eat tree leaves. They don't have to compete with all the other animals. So white rhinos and black rhinos were probably pretty similar a long time ago. And then the ones that figured out if you just walk around with your head down eating the grass, you don't have to fight with anyone and there's tons of food, and you
Yeah.
don't have to compete with the black rhinos who are eating all the shrubs.
Yeah. So, can you tell us more about why some Asian rhinos only have one horn and other Asian rhinos have two?
So I'm not sure anybody knows for sure why rhinos have the number of horns they do. I think there's a lot of theories about why it might be that way, but most rhinos don't really use their horn for something like fighting.
Yeah.
But some rhinos will use their horn to do things like um, cut up the bark on a tree or rub on things to leave markings. So I don't know that anybody's ever told me a really good reason that I believe why some have one and some have two.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing if you live somewhere out wide open, it's probably safer to have two big giant horns. But if you're someone who lives in like closed in forests or plants, having two giant horns might be something that, you know, doesn't work well for you. You couldn't run away from a predator if you're going to get stuck on things because your horn. It's kind of like being a deer with a big rack of antlers. If you're in a really tight forest, you can get stuck in the trees. But if you live in open spaces like a moose, you can have giant antlers and you're not going to get caught on things. So some of them probably just evolved one horn or smaller horns because the place they lived in, it was safer.
Okay.
Um, what are some of the research programs that are currently going on in the zoo?
So one of the things that we do at the Sacramento Zoo is we work with UC Davis and we work with that vet school. So we train residents who want to be zoo vets, and every one of our residents that comes through will choose a research project. So they'll do something that relates to taking care of animals under human care, and they'll study it and they'll use our animals to help find ways to provide better vet care. So I had a resident who looked at a type of bacteria that grows on the shells of pond turtles because we have endangered pond turtles. We want to re-release them, but the ones in the wild are having this problem with this like fungal shell disease.
Mm.
So they worked with our animals in the zoo to figure out what's the best way to treat the fungus to save the animals. And if they figure it out with the ones that we have in our zoo, they can apply it to the ones in the wild. Or we had a resident look at a certain medication that people use in dogs and cats, and they wanted to figure out if it would work for cheetahs. Because if they try it with our cheetahs and it's safe, then they know when they're doing conservation work in the wild, this medication that's pretty safe for dogs and cats might be a safe thing to use on a wild one so you don't risk hurting it.
I know
So
she
it's neat to have residents because they come through and they do cool research every single year.
Yeah, I know she was smiling because one of her dream colleges is UC Davis because
Or
of her.
It's good. If you
Okay.
go to Davis and you want to be a vet in a zoo, you'll come and you'll do a residency with us.
Mhm.
Um, you said that they found a medication that they use on dogs, and then they think it might be safe to work on cheetahs.
Mm.
What is that medication for?
So it's a medication called gabapentin. And if you have dogs or cats, you might have gotten it from your vet. Gabapentin used to be used in people because what it does is it works on your nerves. So if you have something like nerve pain or people who have illnesses like restless leg syndrome, something where the nerves in your body are misfiring. This medication kind of calms down that communication between your brain and the nerves. So if the pain comes from nerve pain, it'll work on your brain so that you don't feel all that nerve pain. Or if you're having nerves that are kind of misfiring and you're having problems with nerves in your body, it'll help with that. And then when they started trying it on dogs and cats, it works the same way. So it can help them with pain without using some of the other pain medications we use that can be really hard on your liver or your kidneys when your body tries to process them. So this medication can help with pain without being hard on their organs. And when you look at cats, especially, cats can be really sensitive to things with their kidneys. Kidney disease is common in house cats, but it's also common in wild cats. So lions, tigers, cheetahs, they can all be prone to kidney problems. So
Oh,
finding a medication that could help with pain that wouldn't be hard on their kidneys would be a lot better.
okay. And
Um, how come some giraffes are born without spots? I mean, we read the National Geographic Kids magazine, and in one of the magazines, they said there's like this new giraffe baby born without spots. Why does this
Mhm.
happen? Why is it so rare?
So it's kind of like finding albino animals, where sometimes just one little part of your genetic code while you're developing either doesn't get accessed or gets over accessed. So the spots that appear on most animals that have spots or stripes, it's part of their genetic makeup. They are going to have that pattern. They're going to be, born with it. It's going to grow in. So it's just kind of a rare mutation. So, no spots on a giraffe and actually albino giraffes are something that do happen. They're just not a species where it comes up very often because having spots is so important to how they live. So, if you were an animal with no spots, you might not be as successful in the wild. You couldn't camouflage as well, or you might have a harder time finding a mate. So, if those animals that have that mutation aren't as likely to reproduce, it's not going to get carried on to other animals. Those animals are more likely to die in the wild and never have offspring. So it's something that if it does show up, the animals that have that trait are probably going to die out faster. And so it doesn't appear anymore. It's kind of like white tigers in captivity versus in the wild. A white tiger in the wild doesn't do very well. Being bright white, they stand out and it's harder to hunt. And it's
yeah.
also easier for hunters to find them. But under human care, when you don't have to worry about something like that, if you're born white, you're going to do okay.
Yeah.
So
So,
there are giraffes with no spots, but that's more likely to happen in a zoo because in the wild, they're not going to survive very long.
excuse
Bless
me.
you.
How and why are giraffe tongues purple?
So their whole skin is actually that way. And the theory is if you're an animal that's in really hot sun all the time and you're constantly sticking your tongue out because that's how you eat, their skin is dark. So animals like zebras and antelopes and giraffe have really dark skin that helps you not get sunburned. And then your tongue is also dark because it's always sticking out of their mouths while they eat leaves, and you don't want that getting sunburned. So the very back portion of their tongue is actually light, and the end of it, all the part that sticks out while they eat, is dark.
Okay. And can you tell us more about your copies at the zoo?
So okapis are the only other members of the giraffe family.
Mhm.
So we call them a forest giraffe. So there's a lot of things about okapis that are very similar to a giraffe. If you look at them, they have the same really big ears and they rely on their hearing. Giraffes can actually see a lot of colors, and that's not normal for a hoofed animal. So giraffes can see tons and tons of colors, and okapis can do the same. And then okapis have the same long tongue because they're eating leaves. But whereas giraffes got really, really tall because they're out on a savanna and they need to be able to reach trees, okapis stayed really short because they live in really dense rainforests. So if they were tall, they would just always be tangled up in trees. And an okapi is more likely to run into predators. They're more likely to run into things that are living in the jungle hunting stealthily, whereas a giraffe who can look out on a nice open savanna is going to see their predator coming more quickly. So okapis are really evolved to stay deep in the forest where it's dark.
Yeah.
And then they have those stripes on their tush. Part of that is it helps other okapis find them. Because if you're an animal that can see color, like we are as people, we don't
Yeah.
look at zebras and think they're well camouflaged, right? Zebras
Yeah.
stand out to us very obviously.
Yeah,
So if
but
you're an
well, of the creatures looking at the zebra, they
Yep.
wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the landscape and the zebra.
Yep. So if you're an okapi with stripes on your tush, an animal that's trying to hunt you can't find you because they don't see in color. But if you're another okapi trying to look around in a dark forest, bright black and white stripes are going to stand out, and you would be able to find another okapi if it's breeding season. Or if you're a baby okapi and you're trying to find your mom, she would look really obvious to you.
Yeah.
So they have a neat camouflage pattern that helps them hide from predators but find other okapis.
Okay. And if you were to put like okapis and giraffes in the same enclosure, would they get along?
Probably not. Okapis are used to kind of being solitary. They don't form big herds, whereas giraffes are pretty social. So giraffes can live really well with other animals. I think the problem would be that okapis don't like the same kind of landscape. So giraffes like standing out in the open, and okapis love hiding in plants. So if you took okapis and put them in the giraffes enclosure, the okapis would probably be very nervous because they wouldn't have anything to hide in. And then if you put the giraffes into the okapi enclosure, they would just stomp all over everything and trip on it because they're kind of awkward and they don't do well with lots of things in their way. But I don't think they would fight. I think they could get along. They just wouldn't enjoy the same types of things.
We know that okapi babies don't poo.
Their
So
first year.
how do they get rid of their waste?
So one of the things is for the first couple of months, they're just not producing that much waste because they're only nursing. So it just kind of backs up in their system until it's the first time to go. Usually under human care, it can be a few months before you see them go, and that's what keeps them safe. But it's not going anywhere. They're just hanging on to it because Okapi mom's milk just doesn't have a lot of extra things, so it's not got a lot of waste that they need to try to filter out. So they can go longer without pooping because they're just not building up as much.
If an okapi baby poos, is that like their first sign of maturity?
It's more that it's the point where their digestive system has started adapting to other food. So a giraffe will learn to eat solid food within like 2 to 3 weeks. Okapis will survive off of milk a little longer, but it's once they start eating leaves and now they're having all that waste build up in their system. So yeah, it's kind of a sign of maturity. It's a sign that they don't need just their mom's milk to survive anymore and they're starting to eat regular food.
Okay, and we have our last question.
Sure.
Do you want to ask it, Isha?
Sure. How can we and our listeners support zoos and be respectful visitors to the animals that are in the zoos and in animals in general?
So I personally think visiting zoos is great for people. I think the more that you encounter wild animals and see them and learn about them, the more likely people are to care about them. I also think that most people who go visit the zoo, they love seeing the animals, but they don't always think of it as being in the animal's home. So
Yeah.
usually that's what I tell people. If you want to be a good zoo visitor, treat it like you were a guest in somebody else's house. Because the animals that live at the zoo, they live there all the time and they're welcoming you in to learn about their life and see where they live. So I treat it when I go to another zoo like I'm visiting somebody's house. And then I use the same respect that I would use if I was visiting a friend or a family member. That's how I treat a zoo.
Yeah. Thank you, and all the best on your travel.
Yeah.
Thank you. You guys had really great questions. It was really enjoyable to talk to you.
Nice meeting you.
It was nice meeting you. You guys have a good evening, okay?
You
It's been
too.
great talking to you.
Thanks. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed our episode.
Be sure to check out our next episode about temperate grasslands.
Also, be sure to say what your favorite animal is in the poll below.
Bye!